Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. So today we have a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's obviously a lot of stuff going on inside of Ukraine, but also in other parts of the world as well. And with that, please remember that if you're watching on YouTube, in the description below, there is a donation links section where we have it sectioned off for different parts of the world. If you're wanting to support the war effort or humanitarian efforts, there are plenty of them inside of the Ukraine section there, right there at the top. We also have a section for the Horn of Africa, a couple of them, one specifically for Ethiopia and one for Somalia. The Horn of Africa is affected by a very severe drought, and 90% of people in the Tigray region of Ethiopia rely on humanitarian assistance, and currently that stuff's just not reaching them. And at this point in the Horn of Africa, the highest risk population is actually children ages 5 and under. So please go check that out, as well as the donation link for Southeast Asia, specifically for places like Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, the Vietnam. They were hit by Super Typhoon Rai and are currently going through recovery efforts, major flooding, major landslides, the works. So I understand Ukraine, of course, is the big topic, and Ukraine does need a lot of support as this continues, but we cannot also forget the millions of other people that still need support globally. And if you can't give a lot, give a little. With that, we're going to go ahead and dive right into the news, because there is a pretty significant amount of stuff coming out of Ukraine right now. And the first thing we have here is actually here up by Kyiv. Arestovich, who is one of the presidential aides, actually stated today that the missile attacks were targeting railroad infrastructure across the country. Over the last few days, there's been a large amount of cruise missile strikes that have hit different parts of the country. We've seen Odessa hit. Kyiv was hit. Some even one failed and landed just outside Kyiv, hitting another village, a residential area. Dnipro, Kharkiv, of course, is under that sustained bombardment. Lviv, all these places are being hit. And the reason they're targeting this infrastructure is because there's a massive amount of equipment that is coming to Ukraine from Western countries. Things like the Gepard, which is it's considered an AAP, or an anti-aircraft platform, and it's a mobile anti-aircraft system from Germany. We're seeing heavy amounts of artillery and equipment coming across the border from the United States. We're seeing vehicles, the works. Basically, everything. In fact, there's even currently statistics where about 1/3 of the supplies of javelins and stingers in the United States have already been sent to Ukraine, and they're currently worrying about how many more they can start to send to Ukraine from the U.S. stockpiles without putting the U.S. stockpiles dangerously low and affecting the United States military readiness. So, massive amounts of equipment coming over, and more is already on the way. And speaking of that, a Russian missile ended up landing near Brovary. This is part of those ballistic cruise missiles attacks that we've seen today and yesterday. Basically, this missile was flying, probably going to hit a target in Kyiv. It was shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. And we have a couple videos here. Once again, something we hit on yesterday is that these videos seem to have a lot of information, or seem to be starting to get blurred out. This is because the terrain features are something that Russia could use to actually adjust their fire. And so that is something that Ukraine has started to see in other parts of the country. I know in at least some parts of the country, it can come with hefty fines or even jail time for filming some of these, because it is becoming a serious problem. So let's take a look. So very short video there at the beginning. You just barely caught it coming down because most of it's been pixelated out. But here we can see actually the impact crater of where it landed just outside the city. Once again, it was shot down by Ukrainian air defenses, so it was no longer an effective munition. But that doesn't mean it's still not dangerous. As we move a little bit further, we start to move down towards Kharkiv and start to actually get into the front lines here. And the first thing we have is that Gorky Park was hit by Russian shelling. And that we've seen this before. This is a place where it's basically an amusement park in the middle of the city. And we've seen them hit this location before. Today, they hit it again. There are no military targets in this location. There is no purpose of keeping military targets near this location. And so this just kind of this kind of underscores that really mass bombardment that they're conducting. It's not a discriminate bombardment, not that really any bombardment is, but this very indiscriminate shelling of highly populated civilian areas. And this is starting to really show the ideology of Russian terror tactics. This is something that Ukraine has spoken on before. This is something that it could be a very real, viable thing. The main officer in charge of the military operation currently going on for Russia inside Ukraine, they went from being a political oversight to being an actually military oversight. And what this has done is the guy in charge, he is actually known as the Butcher of Syria. When I was in Syria, he was the commanding officer of the southern Russian forces. And at that point, they bombed Aleppo to the ground. They basically leveled the whole city. They also used things such as chemical weapons. They used the Wagner PMC organization, private military corporation. They used them in order to have plausible deniability in a lot of these actions. And here, since it is official Russian state-censored activities, this is something that you are going to see just from the standard military forces. And we do have some videos of that today here as well. So that does have some copyright audio there, but we take a look here. Like I said, it's just an amusement park. And it's being just leveled by artillery strikes. So once again, as you can clearly see, there's no military targets. There isn't really any place to put a military target in this location without it, having to do a 13-point turn just to, get around and move out. So it's not really a sustainable place to hide military infrastructure. So those CCTVs giving us really good footage of the shelling there. All those security cameras. If this image doesn't capture the ideology of this war in a single frame, that is an explosion next to a child's playground. There's nothing more I could really add to that. And we can see the devastation in this next video. It's just immense. Entire parts of this thing are now on fire and are having to be put out. And we do know that the shelling just didn't stop. The Kharkiv is under considerable bombardment. It's basically under constant bombardment. In fact, one of the tactics that has been used and was used against the White Hats in Syria and is now being used here is they will conduct a bombardment, they will have a tactical pause, and then they will hit another bombardment. What this does is it allows rescue workers to go out and attempt to save people that were injured or killed or what have you. And now those rescue workers are exposed, and the second set of shelling comes out, and now they are now also injured, and that takes even more people away that can provide those life-saving measures to civilian populations. We saw it in Syria. We've seen it here in Kharkiv. We've had videos on previous streams of it happening in Kharkiv, and it just doesn't stop. So these guys may be putting out the fire, but the danger's still there. The next round of shelling could be coming in at any time. So as we can see, the emergency crews in Ukraine have been working tirelessly, and everyone talks about the actual troops on the front line, but the emergency crews, the paramedics, the doctors, the firefighters, the police officers have been working just as tirelessly as everyone else in this war, and they have done an amazing job thus far. So we need to not forget they are also constantly, keeping things together, and keeping, rescuing people after bombardments, putting themselves also in harm's way, to go and rescue people and to conduct body recovery and to give families closure, and just to ensure that, like I said, the next round of shelling could have come in, but it's a heavily forested park. There's raging fires currently ongoing. What's to say that if those firefighters didn't come through, that fire spreads? And that's even more people now that are displaced and that are killed or injured, so they are doing an amazing job. But there is good news along the Kharkiv front. We see a T-90M destroyed in the Kharkiv Oblast here. So we do know that Ukrainian forces are conducting a rather massive counteroffensive in the Kharkiv Oblast. They've been very successful thus far. We saw yesterday where they actually ended up capturing a village over here. The Molodova was recaptured by Ukrainian forces and has been liberated. And now somewhere in this oblast, we've also seen a T-90M. We don't know the exact location along the front this is, but the T-90M is one of the most relevant tanks that Russia has. And when I say that, it is probably the best thing they're going to field in this war. We will not see, likely, T-14 Armadas. They have too many issues, too many questions, not enough research and development done on them, and realistically, they're prone to breakdowns at this point. The kinks haven't been worked out yet. The T-90, though, has been a reliable workhorse for Russia and is basically their newest thing. And while we've seen T-90s destroyed, the T-90M is it's very rare, and it's one of the best upgraded versions they have. It costs ridiculous amounts of money. I think it's like $5 million per tank, and that's US dollar equivalent, not ruble. So that's, everyone's life savings right now in Russia. And what we see, and like I said, in a photo release today, we see it just sitting there on the side of the road, just smoking, which isn't something that should be surprising. Though Western anti-armor equipment, such as the Javelin anti-tank missile, the Stunga P, which is what is Ukrainian made. It was originally meant to be shipped to the Middle East. They went ahead and kept those because they knew they were going to need them, and it's done very, very well. The In-Law has done really well. The Panzerfaust, the newest version of the Panzerfaust, I believe it's the Panzerfaust 3, is doing extremely well. And they are just obliterating any tank, any armored vehicle that Russia has put in this front so far. They've tried putting those Javelin cages. A lot of people call them cope cages. They're a Javelin cage. And it sits on top of the tank. Those aren't effective for or even against top-down attacks. The tandem warhead is just too powerful. And it's just too effective. These armored vehicles just aren't standing a chance. And this is one of the reasons why why people are starting to think that maybe tanks are becoming obsolete. My personal opinion, as someone whose job it was, I was an anti-tank missileman, and I don't believe tanks are going by the way of the dinosaur. They are not going out of fashion. How they are used is very poorly by the Russian doctrine, but they still serve very important purposes and just like any other tool, have a very specific task. You don't use a hammer to screw in a nail, or you don't use a hammer to put a screw in. You use it to drive a nail. And Russia's trying to use it to put in a screw. That's kind of the ideology, I think, is how it's being used here, and I think it may be more successful along the Donetsk and Luhansk front here in the Donbass. And that is not to say that war is tiring, and I can attest it is an extremely energy depriving effort. And we can see here that it requires constant tactical pauses, constant types of rest. This stuff is not. It weighs a lot. I mean, your average kit, without even carrying a pack on you, just your helmet, your body armor, your ammunition, your weapon can carry upwards of 40 to 60 pounds that you're carrying on your body all of the time. And so you're constantly getting winded. You're constantly getting tired. And of course, you train for this, but training only goes so far. Everyone has a limit. And you still need to have enough energy to actually do the fighting. So these guys are taking a rest. And luckily for this Ukrainian soldier, he's got himself a little friend. So we have a little bit of an uplifting video here. Just wanted to throw this in because who doesn't like animals? They are, I mean, the dogs and the cats are absolutely adorable. So we're going to take a look. Just living their best life there and giving some much needed morale boosts to the troops. However, that morale boost is badly needed because we do know that the Russians are unrelenting. And something that we've seen before and we continue to see is the possibility of incendiary munitions, including white phosphorus, being used. And it is very possible that white phosphorus or a similar munition could have been used in Marinka. White phosphorus is also known as Willie Pete, which is its nickname. It burns extremely hot, and it is actually a war crime to use on people. There are a couple of different types of uses for it if you're going to use it in that fashion. But we've seen this before. We've seen possible confirmations of white phosphorus being used in Ukraine before against civilian infrastructure and against infantry. Incendiary munitions are not banned outright. However, their types of uses are limited. So you can use incendiary munitions on things such as fuel depots, on things such as ammunition depots, but you can't use it against people, and you especially can't use it against civilians because civilians are non-combatants. It violates the Geneva Convention and about a billion aspects. But especially you can't use it even on infantry, and it's used for screening. It produces a very thick white smoke, and this is what is used by artillery to create smoke screens to hide troop movements on a much larger scale than just your average smoke grenade. And when you're using it as infantry, as what we're seeing here, possibly, that is an entirely different story. There are currently, at least in the U.S. military, people in Fort Leavenworth currently who did this in places like Iraq and Afghanistan who are serving life sentences for war crimes. So take a look. So no audio with this one, but what you're seeing, white phosphorus burns bright and white, and it produces a very thick smoke. And so we're seeing it. It looks like it's being air bursts over top of this. Willie Pete has different variants. There were white phosphorus grenades. They are no longer in production, and I believe have been all destroyed. But there is also mortar rounds and artillery rounds that do use them. This one does have audio. And you can see in this video that thick white smoke, even though it's dark, you start to see it kind of rising up from where this white phosphorus is landing. So very disturbing. We can't confirm that it is indeed white phosphorus or an incendiary munition, but based on at least my knowledge, which is in a limited scope, of course, but I try to think I have a general idea of what I'm talking about with this stuff. That appears to be the case. And going back to those missile strikes, a railroad bridge here in Dnipro, we actually have the exact coordinates on this bridge. That's how I have this point here. This rail bridge here in Dnipro was hit with a Russian cruise missile today. Once again, goes back to what Aristovich was saying. The railroads are being targeted because that is the main mode of transportation on both sides, and that is how you get heavy equipment to the front very quickly without risking aircraft losses, which could be absolutely, I mean, Ukraine doesn't have a large air force, so it'd be very substantial to lose any aircraft, transport aircraft especially. So it's just much safer to do it by rail, but that means that hard infrastructure that's not easy to just move, such as rail bridges, are going to be targets. So we have a couple of different things here. Once again, no audio, but direct strike on the bridge as cars are crossing. So, of course, most of these rail bridges are right next to, as you can see here. This is just a normal view. This is a normal motor vehicle bridge, and then there's the rail bridge right next to it. I have a couple different angles here.
Ёбнуло просто, что пиздец. Это просто пиздец, нахуй.
Даша?
Сейчас уйду.
Харе!
Только что так ёбнуло просто. Пиздец. Пиздец. Блядь.
So once again, missile strikes there in Dnipro on targeting the rail bridge there, trying to slow down more equipment coming across. And we're actually going to go ahead and jump down here to Mariupol. So just within the occupied parts of the city, residents are selling the last of their belongings. Any valuables they have, any excess food they may have, they are trying to sell it off, because everything is scarce. Everything in Mariupol is scarce. The city has been leveled. If you had a job, it's gone. It's been wiped off the face of the earth by the Russian shelling. If there is no aid coming from Russia, there are no SIM cards that you can just get for free from Russia so you can communicate with your families. You are cut off from the rest of the world. There's no one coming to help you. You've lost everything. So now they're taking to the streets to sell what they can, try and get whatever money they can, buy SIM cards so they can talk to their families, buy food so they can just sustain themselves and or their families, and do everything they can just to survive, because there's nothing left. There's nothing left you can do. And you're in occupied territory now. So let's take a look here.
Водка обалденная.
So that's very heartbreaking to see that that's kind of what it's resorted to, because there's nothing left. I mean, once again, if you had a job, it's gone. It's been shelled and bombed and destroyed. You're in occupied Russian territory, so whatever company that you did work for likely isn't doing business with Russia and therefore would not be operating in the occupied zones. But the bad news doesn't stop there. The Azovstal is still being stormed by Russia, or it was for this past 24 hours. Reportedly, as we'll get to later, that has supposedly stopped, but today is under heavy attack. They're reporting the actual communications inside the Azovstal were actually cut off for a period of time. However, those links were then brought back online, and there has been some news coming back out after that. They have reportedly repelled several heavy assaults on the factory and in the factory. We do know that Russian forces have pushed further into the factory itself. We do not know what level of control they have, if any. We do not know the losses currently. We know at least 2 Ukrainian women, civilians, were killed. We did have photo confirmation regarding that. So we can say with pretty good affirmation that did occur. Reportedly, 10 civilians were also injured in shelling. That was yesterday. And so we're seeing basically what ended up happening is during the ceasefires and the evacuations, Russia used that opportunity to move its troops and forces into position to storm the Azovstal once those evacuees were well on their way to Zaporizhzhia. So, and we're going to take a look here at the footage coming out from that. Once again, copyright music there, but we can take a look. The heavy bombing, and that's not your average, that is carpet bombing of the Azovstal. This is World War II style carpet bombing of the Azovstal steelworks. On top of the other types of shelling. I mean, the rockets and everything haven't stopped. So, that's insane. Absolutely insane. It's tactics from 80 years ago. These are not small munitions being used. These are heavy munitions. I've never seen munitions this powerful being used in person. And I've seen airstrikes before. And I've seen some of the larger pieces of ordnance being dropped. Never seen anything quite like this. So... and it doesn't stop. So we do have a video from the deputy commander of the Azov battalion there, and we did confirm the translation on this. So take a look.
Слава Україні! Маріупольський гарнізон вже 70-й день сам на сам протистоїть переважаючим силам противника. З 25 квітня ми тримаємо кругову оборону.
So from my understanding, the subtitles are actually out of frame, so I'll go ahead and go over this for you. Slava Ukraini! For the 70th day in a row, the Mariupol garrison has been facing outnumbered enemy forces on its own. Since April 25th, we have been holding an all-around defense of the Azovstal plant. For the second day in a row since the enemy broke into the plant, heavy bloody fights are going on. I am proud of my soldiers who are making superhuman efforts to contain the enemy's offensive.
Я дякую
I thank the
всьому
whole
світу
world
за
for the
колосальну
enormous
підтримку
support of
гарнізону
the Mariupol
Маріуполь.
garrison.
Наші солдати
Our
на це
soldiers,
заслуговують.
our soldiers deserve
Ситуація
it.
вкрай
The
складна,
situation is
але не
extremely
дивлячись ні на
difficult,
що,
but in spite of
ми
everything, we
продовжуємо
continue to
виконувати
carry
наказ
out
тримати
the
оборону.
order to keep the defense.
Слава Україні!
And so that is the word from the Azov battalion right now inside the Azovstal plant. But hopefully, the fighting has at least ceased at this point. Now, obviously, that second video that we watched is titled, "This is what a ceasefire looks like," or how a ceasefire looks like the Azovstal now. We can't confirm that, of course, but this is because the reason they're saying that is because Ukraine and Russia agreed to a ceasefire in Mariupol between May the 5th and May the 7th. And so this is in order to conduct more evacuations to civilians and to evacuate possibly wounded. We don't know. We don't know if this is something that was agreed to through coordinated efforts with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, or if this was, and as well as the UN, or if this was just a bilateral agreement between the two countries. But that is what is currently expected. Of course, when it comes to agreements with Russia, there is a big question mark on whether or not Russia will actually uphold those agreements. We've seen it before. Humanitarian corridors shelled while they've been opened by Russian forces out of Mariupol. We've seen it before. And so we can't say for good certainty if Russia will actually uphold its end of the bargain here. But there it is, coming from Nexta, that they are going to be having a ceasefire between May the 5th, which is currently, the date was started a couple hours ago, and currently. And as we move away from Mariupol, the news from the city does continue, and that's because Mariupol survivors are talking. That's something you're never going to be able to stop and as they are reaching Zaporizhia and are going through that processing and screening and everything Ukraine is doing to make sure, these are who they say they are and whatnot. They are Ukrainian citizens, going through the medical screening. They are talking about their experiences and what they have gone through. And we can see that here today, and we're going to go ahead and just take a look.
Нас называли карандашами, русские. Я сама... карандаши, мы не люди, мы карандаши. Мы были 11 карандашей. Нас военные не держали. Вот как если кто-то рассказывает, что военные держали. Военные нас не держали. Но они нам говорили, хотите рисковать своей жизнью, идите. Мы прекрасно понимали, что под этими орудиями всяких убийств мы просто не выживем, мы просто никуда не дойдем.
Це ви говорили з українськими військовими? З українськими
Да, а
військовими.
какие? На Азовстале только украинские были военные. А пока мы были на Азовстале.
Они вам говорили, что можете выйти, если хотите,
Да,
но
если
это
мы,
на ваш риск.
да, они говорили, если вы хотите уйти, уходите. Вы рискуете своей жизнью. И мы уходили. Правда, один раз, мы именно, конкретно наша семья, мы дошли 100 метров, ну и мы поняли, что мы дальше не сможем. Вы не понимаете, как это страшно. Когда сидишь в бомбоубежище, в сыром мокром подвале, а он вот так подпрыгивает и вот так его качает. А потом мы, когда могли выходить на улицу, я солнце увидела второй раз за 2 месяца. Когда выходишь, а там воронка 15 метров в диаметре, и я не знаю, сколько метров в глубину. И мы вот так вот каждую ночь ложились спать и думали, а выживем мы, а мы проснемся. А мы могли вообще не проснуться. И только, Господи, пожалуйста, пусть бомбы летят мимо нашего бомбоубежища. Потому что если вот эти воронки, которые были, они пробили бы бомбоубежище, все, нас бы просто накрыло всех.
So, very concerning remarks. And once again, we have an in-house translator who's fluent in both Ukrainian and Russian. So we do make sure that this stuff is verified before we throw it up here. We don't just want this kind of the actual subtitles to kind of take away from what's being said there or trying to mince words. So very, very concerning. And this isn't the only interview we've seen. We've seen plenty of others, but a lot of concerning interviews from survivors coming out of the Azovstal as to the situation there. Mykolaiv is reportedly under heavy bombardment today. We don't know anything else other than the fact that they are under bombardment. We don't know the extent of the damage, what the targets were. We don't know any casualties currently, civilian, military, otherwise. All we know is the fact that they are currently under bombardment. We don't know if it's still ongoing, but it was ongoing as of the point this was reported. So we could take a look here. And so, from my understanding, that would have been BM-21 Grad systems that were bombarding this location. And just based off of the amount of artillery guns you would actually need to create that kind of a bombardment would be insane. So that had to have been multi-rocket launch systems such as the Grad. There's no other. That's a saturation bombardment through and through, and that is what the Grad does best. So from our understanding, that would have had to have been something similar to that. As we move into the Black Sea here, Caliber cruise missiles were seen being launched from the Black Sea again today. Once again, we've seen in at least Sevastopol at least some of the submarines, or at least one of the submarines of the Russian Black Sea Fleet having to reload its stock of cruise missiles twice. And we know that Moskva was sunk. Now, Moskva is pretty much the only surface ship in the Black Sea Fleet that was capable of launching these things, and in a significant number anyway. And so and now surface vessels are way too exposed. They're way too vulnerable to things like anti-ship missiles that we've seen launched from Ukraine. And so because of that, their basically surface fleet is no longer operating. They're far out of reach of these anti-ship missiles, and that really leaves their submarines, which are going to be a lot harder of a target, even when they surface, to actually conduct these. But they're very capable. They're nuclear-capable submarines, but they also conduct conventional warfare as well. They have Caliber cruise missiles aboard just for this purpose. And we can see more launching here off the coast. So, once again, Black Sea Fleet, the bombardments just don't stop. But that is actually the news inside of Ukraine. But that does not mean that the news regarding Ukraine stops. And as we go ahead and move up here into Russia and into Moscow, Russian state media, once again, has made some very interesting statements. Once again, we verified this to make sure that this isn't just some crazy talk that someone put over this. It's not. It's legitimate. And this is coming from Russian state media. And it's not just interesting, it's concerning. Deeply concerning, the kind of statements being made. So I'm just going to let you all take a look at this and just... I have no other words to describe what I'm seeing here, because it's pretty wild. So let's take a look.
Вот этой буквы Z, должны понимать, что если они рассчитывают, что их пощадят, нет, их не пощадят. Нет, это все по-серьезному. Это в случае чего концлагеря, перевоспитание, это, так сказать, стерилизация, это все очень серьезно. Вот это.
Concentration camps, re-education, sterilization, this is very serious. How? Why? It's a state-run media channel, so this thing's government-controlled. How this flies for anyone, and how anyone can sit there and openly just admit these things, knowing that they're trying to portray a beneficial narrative. Misinformation, I wrote something on this and posted it in a couple of places. Misinformation, the whole point of it is either to undermine a beneficial narrative for your opponent or to create a beneficial narrative for yourself. It's an information war just as much as an actual ground war, and therefore we're going to see it on both sides. That's why the numbers vary so differently from Russia to Ukraine. It's not the first time this has happened. If you look at the invasion of Iraq, according to battlefield commanders, the United States military and coalition forces would have killed the Iraqi army 5 times over completely. So it's not the first time in history this has happened, but the technology that we have now is very different from what we had in 91, 2003, so on. And this has been the most transparent war. Social media has played a vital role. People at the beginning of the war were laughing about the fact that people were recording parts of this war on TikTok. That stuff is an intelligence goldmine and an information goldmine. And everyone is trying to build a narrative, whether that's pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia. You're trying to garner support. That is the point of misinformation. When you're sitting there and releasing certain information at certain times. This is why Russia releases certain casualty numbers at certain periods of time. They may be outdated, but that doesn't mean that at the time that they got that information it wasn't true. It just means that they are just now releasing it. The stuff along the Kherson front, for instance. If we go back here over into Ukraine, the stuff along the Kherson front, we won't hear anything for days and days, weeks even. That's because Ukrainian forces are heavily moving along here. But as soon as something happens that the Russians are moving, we hear about it instantly. That's because you don't want to show where your forces are. If you're backing Ukraine, then you don't want to show where Ukrainian troops are. But you want to show exactly where the Russians are, because that tells everyone in the world, hey, this Russian tank is moving here. Hey, this Russian armor group is moving here. Russian troops are spotted doing this in Kherson or in Chernobivka, or there was a massive explosion outside Chernobivka as it was recorded from people there. Well, we must have hit the ammunition depot. Our strike was successful. And that is the kind of thing that we're seeing. It's the most transparent war in history. And we're seeing both sides, not just Russia. Russia, to a much larger extent, though, try to manipulate the narrative through social media, through their news channels, and everything else here. And so the fact that they're talking openly about sterilizing people, having concentration camps, and re-educating people is extremely concerning, because this is, once again, is a government-backed state media source. So this is something the government is okay with them saying. And reportedly today, coming from the Jerusalem Post, Hamas, which is a Palestinian terror organization, had a delegation sent to Moscow following raids on the Temple Mount and mosques throughout the Palestinian zones, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this also comes immediately after Russia stated on Italian news television and in an official statement yesterday that Jewish people were the most anti-Semitic themselves, and that the predominantly Jewish country of Israel, which was founded following the Holocaust, as a result of the Holocaust, supported neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. This is a predominantly Jewish country that is reportedly, according to Russia, supporting neo-Nazis. So, after you let that sink in, this once again is coming from the Jerusalem Post. And we can go ahead and take a look at their stuff here. This is their actual article. So, the Hamas is Palestinian. There is a lot of tension between Israel and Palestine, and I'm not saying Palestine is, or that Israel is a saint in that conflict. They certainly are not. We've seen video evidence to prove otherwise. But Hamas is a very extreme group. There's going to be tensions even amongst the more moderated groups there, but Palestine's Hamas is a very extreme group. They are a terror organization, just like any other Islamic extremist organization, specifically Islamic extremism. Now, there is extremism on all areas and all types of groups, but they are predominantly a Muslim sect. And so that is the concern, is now this could once again link Russia with state-sponsored terrorism, which is concerning, especially if it has any following repercussions in places such as Israel. However, the theme of fires spreading throughout Russia continues as a large industrial fire in Nizhny Novgorod. Once again, I'm really sorry. My pronunciation for a lot of foreign stuff is terrible. I am an American, so I do not have great pronunciation over any of this stuff. Once again, I'm sorry for butchering it. But large industrial fire here. We don't know what the cause was. No one knows what happened. Reportedly, there's also a tanker carrying solvent in Zahinsk. Once again, sorry for that. This place in Russia that is on fire as well. But you do have a video of this here.
Да если что, переехать можно туда, в другую сторону поехать. Ну, горит вообще красиво.
So we have seen a lot of large fires in Russia lately. We've seen it in Moscow. We've seen it, in fact, we saw in Perm yesterday where there was a large explosion from a gunpowder factory. We've seen rocket research laboratories and in centers in Moscow and other parts of the country that caught fire mysteriously. We've seen lots of plants and chemical plants, coal factories, that kind of thing catching fire, none of which the cause has been determined. And this brings into question, is it a form of sabotage, or is it part of political unrest that is quietly growing, or is, well, it's starting to grow a little bit more openly now, if it is the case, or is this just happenstance? And I have a hard time believing simultaneously all of these fires at major facilities, these aren't small fires, are starting in quick succession one after the other. Things like this don't just catch fire all of the time in this kind of a way. So, once again, Russia's not going to necessarily release that information if it does find anything of the sort, because they don't want to show that their own population may not be entirely backing them. As we move over further to the east here, we see that a large and once again going back to the same topic, a military recruitment office here in Nizhnevarotovsk. I'm so sorry once again. This city here was torched by an unknown group of individuals using Molotov cocktails. So obviously there is not support for some in some parts of Ukraine or in some parts of Russia for the war. And there it is. I'm actually going to zoom in here so we can see this fine individual throwing that Molotov cocktail and setting it on fire. He's going to light another one there, toss it. Yet another one, toss it as well. Man, he's got a lot of Molotov cocktails. So, not he I don't think he's going to be signing up to join the war effort anytime soon. And this is also coming as concerns are growing in many places right now and in many official governments, that Russia is currently gearing up to declare full-scale war. They're going to possibly, on May 9th, one of the very likely possibilities is that we know there's manpower shortages in Ukraine for the Russian forces, and declaring full-scale war allows the mobilization of everything in Russia against Ukraine. That allows conscripts to go in there, mass conscription of the Russian population, including the people out in Siberia, and that would flood Ukraine with maybe not greatly equipped troops, but in the words of Joseph Stalin, quantity has a quality all of its own. And we know that it is very unlikely that Putin decides that enough is enough and we're done with the special military operation. No, he's more likely and the rhetoric is pointing in this direction to escalate the conflict further. So that is the concern as May 9th comes up here in 5 days, that may be the reality. However, as we move over into the far east part of this country, reportedly 300 Mariupol survivors who were forcefully deported into Russia have been found. We cannot confirm this. All we had was a satellite image and some I'd say questionable reports, but nonetheless, we do know that they were being sent over to Vladivostok, and they are arriving in this area. They are reportedly being sent into Siberia if they are entering Russian territory, but they reportedly have no money, no way to communicate with their families, and most of their legal documents, including passports, are missing. So, once again, we cannot confirm. It's very much hearsay at this point, but it does go along with reports that we've made prior regarding what was happening in Mariupol and forced deportation there, as well as filling in with those filtration camps. And to finish up here in Europe, the EU has announced its 6th round of sanctions against Russia today, and it is a very important one because they are now starting to strike the energy sector. So, released today, listing of perpetrators of war crimes in Kyiv suburbs for prosecution. The ban on 3 Russian banks from SWIFT, continually cutting off those economic avenues to bypass additional sanctions. And SWIFT is a major banking source for the Russian Federation. It's how they are able to access a lot of their funds. So that freezes the assets now of 3 different Russian banks and their ability to make payments. The ban on 3 Russian broadcasters from operating in the EU makes sense at this point. All Russian media is state-controlled. And a progressive ban on Russian oil imports. And that is the most important one, because the ban on oil, an oil embargo, and an energy embargo against Russia is what's going to hit them the most. Russia is funding its war through oil and gas. Everything else is cut off, but Europe still requires oil and gas imports from Russia, specifically natural gas shipments and oil. Oil now has been something that it's more easily cut. The transportation for that is much different. It doesn't require fixed pipelines. It doesn't require CNG. It doesn't require any of that. It's put in barrels and it's put on board ships and it is transported. So whether they got that from Saudi Aramco, which is basically the largest oil producing company in the world, or if they got that by opening up reserves or what have you, they're moving towards green energy anyway in Europe, and that is something much easier done than natural gas. Natural gas now, though, is going to be the next step. That is the largest part of the energy sector. It is how people in Germany and many parts of Europe heat their homes. operate their businesses, and that requires pipelines or, once again, compressed natural gas, which can be put on ships, but the process is much more expensive and it's much less viable for large-scale use, which is the concern there. And so it's not something. It's not like turning on your water faucet. You can't just turn it off and expect everything to go okay. Germany said that they if they cut off Russian gas right now with the reserves, they could probably make it through to next winter and through the winter. But that second winter would not be so good, and there's a possibility of people freezing in their own homes. So that is the concern currently, but it is going to hit Moscow in the pocket, but really, really hard. So very good to see that. And as we move on into the Middle East, there are a couple of additional topics. And so we have here, protests continue in Yerevan. And so this is in Armenia. The protests are by the opposition party because the ruling party currently in Armenia, for those that don't know, Armenia and Azerbaijan are currently at war. The fighting has pretty much all but ceased, minus some sporadic fighting across the border. The borders have not really shifted at all, but Armenia is essentially expected, the ruling government there is expected to take sweeping concessions from Azerbaijan. And this is part of the basically peace negotiations. They're basically going to take whatever Azerbaijan lays at the table. They're just going to take it. And the opposition party, which is a lot of people, are not very happy with that kind of an approach. We know that over 200 protesters were arrested in the last couple of days. Today, we do not have an updated number, but the protests do continue, and they are massive. Massive. So, take a look here. So, protests do continue. Thousands of people are protesting there in Yerevan. So, as we go further south, we go into Baghdad, and this is where an attack on a high-level security official occurred. Basically, they fired an RPG at his residence, and they were attacking the Deputy Minister of Intelligence and Investigation in the country. So, there were no victims, there were no injuries or deaths, but no one has yet taken responsibility for the attack. There's a lot of people that in Iraq, there is those that back a Iraqi government that supports Western influences, such as the United States and what they've been doing in the coalition forces. And then there is also a group that backs Iranian, basically Iranian-backed people and groups inside of Iraq. Things like Kataib Hezbollah. Kataib Hezbollah is a militia group. It assists government forces, but they are a terrorist organization, and they are Iranian-backed. They are trained by the IRGC, or the Iranian Republican Guard Corps. Iranian Republican Guard Corps, and they have attacked U.S. forces before. In fact, the Kataib Hezbollah also led the attack on the Baghdad U.S. Embassy in 2020. So, but we don't know. I don't know what the Deputy Minister of Intelligence and Investigation, I don't know if he is Iraqi and coalition backed, or if he's Iranian backed. I just don't know. But there are several different types of factions fighting and protesting against each other in the region, as well as the Islamic State is still highly active. But we do have that photo here, and we can see where the rocket impacted there. And it just made a dent, but it didn't appear to really do any significant damage. As we go further south, we actually drop down into Yemen. Yemen has been under a ceasefire. It lasted for the first month of Ramadan, and then we see it continuing into this second month. It was supposed to be a 2-month ceasefire. However, a Chinese-made CH-4 UAV was shot down, and it's a Saudi-owned drone. So this is something that the Houthi rebels are saying are a violation of the truce. So the truce for Yemen was already kind of on a very is walking a very fine line. It was very hopeful from the outset, very optimistic that it would hold up. The fact it held up for a month is good, but if it holds up for an additional month, it will be questionable, as we're already seeing provocations from one side or the other regarding it. So we will have to see. But we do have a video here coming out from Yemen.
بعون الله وفضله تمكن أبطال الدفاع الجوي بإسقاط هذه الطائرة وهذا حطامها بما أن الطيران الحربي.
So once again, that truce is starting to see some issues already. So hopefully it does uphold for another month, and that there is no significant fighting between the Saudi Arabian troops and the Houthi rebels there. In Afghanistan, devastating floods hit Faryab, and basically flash floods hit the area. There was a ton of rain. Several people were killed, and hundreds of houses were essentially destroyed. Reportedly, about 20 people have been killed and 30 are injured. We don't know the true extent. Afghanistan, reporting in Afghanistan is not necessarily a very safe endeavor, and the Taliban keep a pretty tight grip on information coming out, but that's just something too large to completely stop all information. So we'll see what comes out from there. I'm sure the casualties may climb. Usually those estimates are rather conservative. And moving into Africa, we actually move down here into Nigeria again. And that's because dozens of people, or dozens of militants of Boko Haram were actually killed after many of their camps were discovered in the Borno region. The country's armed forces ended up going through. They killed dozens of these militants, and then they raided these camps, and they ended up freeing about 900 people, women and children, that were abducted in earlier attacks. So very good to see, but good to hear that Boko Haram which is an ISIS affiliate, is being engaged by government forces in Nigeria, and that 900 people is not a small amount of people, and that they're being freed. So that's very good to hear as well. So very good to see that those people are now free and can go back to their families and and go back home. And to finally wrap up the day, we actually go down into Santa Cruz region of Argentina. And that is because there has been a huge raptor variant that has been found there. So a research team down there found the largest mega raptor known to date in the province of Santa Cruz. So it lived in about the Cretaceous period, about 70 million years ago. And it basically comes, it's once again the largest raptor ever found. About between 9 to 10 meters long and weighs approximately 5 tons is what the estimated weight is. But the MAPE's skeleton provides a lot of information. It's a lot of, has a lot of answers, of course, gives a lot of answers, it fills in some gaps. But of course, with these kind of things, it always brings up more questions. But we do have an artist representation right now of what this raptor reportedly looked like. So extremely large predator, extremely large carnivore, but this is something that recently was found, and I mean, who doesn't like it? And this is coming directly from that group, Conicet. This is their page here, if we'll bring up here. Appears we're having some slow issues. So, very cool indeed. So, I am a huge fan of archaeology and paleontology and history in general. So, I find dinosaurs extremely fascinating. I wanted to be an archaeologist and a paleontologist when I was a child. So, dinosaurs are always cool. Raptors, especially, are cool. Velociraptors had feathers, for those that don't know. But it's very cool that we're finding more and more and discovering more and more about the history of the planet. Keep in mind, this is not, I mean, there are fossils all over the world, but a lot of stuff is just lost to time. Entire habitats did not get fossilized just because the conditions in those habitats didn't really allow for it. So there are, for every species we know about, there are hundreds and thousands of species we will never know about. So the more we discover, the cooler it gets. So something finally pretty cool regarding dinosaurs. And that wraps up the night. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I hope that you guys are enjoying. I did kind of make a weird statement at the beginning if you're watching on YouTube. I am also streaming this live on another Discord channel as well for people that are especially interested regarding the Ukraine conflict. Just trying to spread awareness because we want to be the news that gives back. And with that, we need to, of course, spread awareness and let people know who we are and what we're trying to do. So check out the fundraiser links in the description on the video. And go and support the efforts going on worldwide, not just in Ukraine, but the millions and millions of people that also need help elsewhere in the world too. We can't forget about them just because the conflict's going on. But if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, I understand. Give the video a like and subscribe. The more people we reach, the more good we can do, and the more fundraising we can conduct, and the more money goes to people in need to help people. We're never going to be doing anything like the chats on here, the super chats. Everything is going to be a fundraiser. Everything is going to be going towards good causes. The links in the description, of course, we vet those ourselves. We make sure that money's going where it needs to go, and upwards of 75 to 80% or more of those donations actually go directly towards helping those people and not towards things like salaries and administration's costs. So we want to make sure that the money gets where it needs to go and not just to the pockets of whoever works there. So we're making sure that that's the case. We were vetting them. So check them out. Give whatever you can. And I hope you guys will be joining us tomorrow. Have a great rest of your guys' evening. I hope that you remain safe, your family and friends remain safe, and I hope that you'll be joining us tomorrow for more news on what's going on in the world. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.